Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the leadership series for people who build, scale, and shape the future of life sciences. I'm your host, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International. Today's guest is Anish Mehta, a global pharmaceutical CEO whose career has spanned engineering, strategy consultancy, commercial leadership, BD, M&A, and private equity-backed transformation. From studying biomedical and chemical engineering, then through McKinsey, Baxter, Hospira, Activus, Allergan, Theramex, and now the CEO of Synthon. Anish has spent his career building businesses, leading turnarounds, acquisitions, and creating value across both innovation, pharma, and generics. He's led complex carve-outs, built global organizations from scratch, overseen major licensing and M&A transactions, and successfully navigated private equity ownership cycles, all while developing a reputation for combining strategic thinking with disciplined execution. This episode is about building the foundations of leadership, becoming a truly global executive, creating value through partnerships and deals, and what it really takes to lead a PE-backed pharma business. Anish, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. It's amazing. I've been working for more than 25 years, and when you kind of sum it up into a couple of sentences, I feel humbled by the opportunities that I've had and the experiences that I've had and the people I've worked with along the way. So yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to talk about it and hope that someone will learn and get something out of this podcast.
Yeah, love it. And do you know what? I started the podcast initially because it was an opportunity for me to almost create like a bit of a leadership Bible to leave for aspiring leaders as they come through. So you've kind of hit the nail on the head that we want people to learn. But also in that little 60-second intro, it is funny how rewarding it is for me to give the opportunity for people like you to come and tell their story. Because you say that 25 years can go in the blink of an eye, but you've done so much.
Well, thank
So
you.
let's
And look, I love podcasts. As probably most of the CEOs you interview, we spend a lot of time on the road. So I read a lot. I listen to a ton of podcasts, and it's just I love the way learning has changed, and there's so many different ways to consume content. And for me, podcasts is probably one of the easiest ones. Whether you're sitting on a bus, a car, a plane, the tarmac, the lounge, it's a great way to absorb and learn content. So yeah, I love these things.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And I always like to kick off active ingredients in the same way. So what do you believe are the three key ingredients of leadership and why?
Yeah, I spent some time thinking about this because I think there are so many different elements that go into leadership, and I think many of them converge on a few different themes. So I'm going to be a little cheeky and give you four instead of three. So let me just rattle them off, and then I'll sort of tell you what I mean by each one. The first one is strategic conviction. The second one is growth mindset. The third one is authenticity. And the fourth one is stamina. So let's go back to the beginning. So, strategic conviction. I think this really combines a couple of different things, but it comes down to knowing what you want to do and why it matters and how you get others to believe it as well. Conviction sometimes is confused with stubbornness or pushiness. This isn't that. This is sort of a courageous decision on where you want to go, backed by facts, by data, and understanding that moving faster than the others is what's actually going to allow you to create value. So that's number one. Number two is growth mindset. Look, I think this applies to lots of industries, but really in our industry, this makes a genuine difference. Like having a North Star, being able to really focus on patients, and in my case, for the last 25 years, I've spent a lot of that time in generics, affordable medicines, enabling access to affordable care. So really having that North Star that everyone can align to, and then getting everyone to really understand that growth for the sake of growth isn't why we do it, but growth for the sake of achieving that purpose is why we do it. So I really think about that growth mindset that has to be purposeful, obviously in our industry, compliant, and anchored to something bigger than the P&L. The next one's authenticity. I think the best leaders are unapologetically human. I learned this phrase from a leader 10, 15 years ago. He said, we take our work seriously, but not ourselves. And I really embraced this sentence because I think it really embodies who I am and the type of culture and leader I want to be. I'm curious. I try and be humble. I'm willing to be coached. I'm willing to learn from people around me, and willing to have a laugh at myself, with others, at others. But I think, those relationships you build, they come at curious moments when you're sitting in a lounge, when you're sitting at a dinner. It's not sitting in the boardroom for sure. And then the last one is stamina, right? The job of a leader is relentless. And the leaders that last aren't the ones that have the most energy, but it's the ones who figure out how to manage their energy sustainably. It's learning how to delegate. It's learning how to surround yourself with people who are better than you. And it's really, it's creating that sustainable drive to ensure that I can stay focused and achieve the other three things that I mentioned.
Yeah. And they were so eloquently put. I think you and I are kindred spirits in the way that you talk about this. One thing I am really interested in, though, is these are great: strategic conviction, growth mindset, authenticity, and stamina. But you don't turn up at the beginning of your career with those. So have these been things that you've picked up along the way? Have you learned from others? Is this, something that you've taken from mentors?
Yeah, definitely. I know the phrase lifelong learner is overused, but I really think of myself as that. I mentioned at the start, I love to read. I listen to podcasts. Right, it used to be newspapers. That it was, magazines. Now there's hardly any print, but I absorb content in a lot of ways. But I also get a lot out of relationships and learning from people. And I've been lucky in my career to have worked with so many amazing people. Some leaders, some doers, some followers. I think leaders often forget that companies operate well when you have everything, right? You need people who are, again, aligned to that purpose, who love their job, who are committed to the cause, and do their job well. Not everyone can or should aspire to be a CEO. Then you'd have a company full of CEOs. But at the end of the day, I've been so lucky to have worked with so many different people, starting from one of my first jobs in the production floor. Actually, I was working making APIs in pharmaceuticals. And I spent a summer working alongside, the day shift crew, and it was like one of the most incredible experiences I ever had. All the way to, now the boardroom discussions. And I think every interaction gives you the opportunity to learn, see what people are doing well, see what people aren't doing well, and I use that to really build my toolkit.
Yeah, and that I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's having an awareness that you are, taking some bits from others, you're losing some parts of yourself, in order to, come back as a better version as you grow and your career enhances. But let's go back to where the journey began. So obviously, before you got onto the kind of shop floor making APIs, what were you like at school, university? Was there any kind of signposts for you having a career in life sciences and being a leader?
Yeah. So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. So I moved to the UK about 15 years ago, but I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and the suburb I grew up in was right next door to Abbott Labs, and Abbott Labs is where my father worked, along with about 75% of the community. So that's one important part of my backstory. My father was an engineer, and he had an incredible career at Abbott that spanned more than 50 years. And he wasn't even one of the longest tenured employees there. It really was an incredible company of purpose and conviction and commitment to employees, et cetera, et cetera. So these people stayed forever. So that's part number one. Part number two was I was, just very good at math and science. Um, I don't know if it's the heritage or what, but it just worked for me. So when I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do, um, it was a pretty easy choice, to be honest, to go and study engineering. Now, my father was an engineer. He spent his career in pharmaceuticals. I was very good at math and science. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had spoken to enough people to understand that the basics of engineering gives you structure. It gives you framework. It gives you um, a, a methodology for solving complex problems in a data driven way. Now, everyone talks about data today, right? It's like the buzzword data, data, data. But, I graduated more than 30 years ago. And back then, this idea of like, you could learn a structured way to solve complex problems and potentially apply it to almost anything, to me was super intriguing. And that's why I ended up studying biomedical engineering at Northwestern University, and then I stayed on to do a master's in chemical engineering because I really liked what I was learning from that structural point of view. But then as I got a little bit deeper into the content of biology, of physiology, of chemistry, along with what I'd seen from my father, I'm like, hey, this kind of seems like it could make sense for me, at least as a starting point. So I would say it wasn't overly engineered, but sometimes you got to look at what's in front of you and make the best decision. And that's kind of how I ended up in the field that I spent my whole career in.
Yeah, so it was a pathway. There was definitely, because I've had some guests that were like, I didn't even know the brands, the companies, didn't know anything. So did you actually, in that time, did you have visibility on what a potential career could look like in different career paths because your father had obviously been in the industry for so long?
I did, and this is part of the beauty of a company like Abbott back then is there were a lot of opportunities for exposure, and I had the opportunity to speak to different people to understand what does it mean to stay in engineering? What does sales and marketing look like? What does a career in, they used to call it international at the time. What does international mean? How do you take products from this country, from the US, and bring them into other markets? And what goes into that? So I was pretty fortunate to be able to have these glimpses into different functions within this industry. Um, Obviously these were short conversations. I would say they didn't influence my decision, but they gave me background, right? So I decided that I was going to stick with the engineering, and I was going to actually go and be an engineer for a couple of years. And I kind of had an idea that I wanted to combine it with an MBA, but I wanted to just start working. Like I wanted to actually see what work is, right? I mean, when you're in university, you have no idea, right? And I had done a couple of summer jobs, and this is where that first really, I would say, foundational experience for me took place, which is when I did this summer job at Abbott, and I was a mill operator for bulk erythromycin. So your listeners will know, right? Very very few people make fermented APIs anymore, but this was the kind of the standard of care for antibiotics. And I had one job: the API comes out all lumpy. You got to put it through a mill, and it comes out fine as a fine powder. And then that powder is used to formulate into pills and capsules and syrups and other things like that. I did that for 10 hours a day, every day, all summer. Now, was not the most intellectually challenging job, but it was probably one of my most pivotal experiences because I actually got a sense of what it takes to make the product, how hard people work, what are the challenges that they're dealing with both in the shop floor and outside. How does the shift work? How does a shift handover work? Like all of these things that as you become managers, you become further and further from what's happening in the Gemba, so to speak. And at the time, I didn't realize it. But as my career progressed and I would think back to some of the people I met, some of the problems that I helped solve, or some of the problems I listened to, I kind of thought, wow, this was really cool. And later on, it had the um, unintended consequence of making me more relatable. So I've worked lots and lots of my time in factories, and when I tell people the story that, hey, I've actually done this job, I know how hard it is. I understand when you have a request for, whatever it may be, I kind of understand it. I think it makes me more relatable, and it helps me connect with our colleagues in these situations. So yeah, sometimes luck is a theme, I think, in getting to a senior leadership role. And I certainly have had my fair share of luck. And when you have these experiences, big and small, you've got to get the most out of it and then think about it and think back to what did you actually get from it, and then how do you use it going forward. And this is one of those.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of leadership stories that I've heard through my career, but also through the podcast, there is that level of empathy that's required to create followership. You need to potentially have been in someone else's shoes and be able to speak their language and understand sometimes the problems. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. And also luck is a theme. I was always told the harder you work, the luckier you get. You can't put the work in, and then you're not put the work in and expect to be CEO one day. You got to put in the graft to make sure that you can get to where you want to get to.
For
So
sure. It's a combination, right?
yeah,
The hard work positions you for that opportunity, and then you've got to be a bit lucky. And when those two things come together, and then of course you've got to capitalize on it, you've got to deliver on it. But there's always, I think back to my career, there's always people, situations, things that happened where I was known as a hard worker, a problem solver, being able to connect the dots. So I was actually given a lot of these opportunities, and then, made something with it, and then something came out of it. So it's a bit of that recurring theme where, understanding, yeah, how do you connect the dots at kind of a bigger picture, like the enterprise level? And I sort of learned that a bit early in my career, again, from different leaders, that when you focus on things that are important to them, when you dive in and you don't worry about what it's going to get me, but you just dive in to solve a complex problem, that's usually what helps get you to the next level.
yeah, yeah. And what about the leadership aspect? Were there signs that you were a natural born leader, or was this something that developed?
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say there were signs of natural born leadership. I think it was a bit observational. I think it became ambition. As I started seeing more and more in those early years of my career, and I think my ambition kind of started to build to say, wait a minute, I love how some of these more senior people are making a real impact for the company, for employees, for patients. I love how they're connecting complex things together in a way to come to a solution that is broader than what I was doing in engineering. And I was on this really amazing engineering program that I was able to work in different factories across the world in different parts of the kind of global pharmaceutical industry or healthcare industry. So I worked in nutrition, I worked in med tech, I worked in pharma, all under Abbott back when they had all these things under in the company. And again, the combination of seeing these different sectors or subsectors within global healthcare, and seeing how some of the different leaders were bringing things together to make an impact, and how they led, right? How they were able to create followership, how they were able to articulate a strategy, a vision to kind of motivate people. That got me excited. So, so that's when I decided that um, I think I want to add something more to my engineering, and I want to go do an MBA. Now the fine asterisk to this is that I wasn't a great engineer. I mean, I'm gonna be very honest with you. I wasn't a great engineer. I really worked hard. I really tried. I had all the sort of the training and the mental ability, but somehow that conversion from my mind to my hands didn't work well. So, so when I told one of my managers, I said, "Hey, I think I'm going to take a leave of absence and go do an MBA." he was the manager of this engineering group. He said, "I think that's a great choice."
Positive encouragement.
Yeah, exactly. So I realized that I probably shouldn't stick around being an engineer. So that's when I decided to go do my MBA. And I would say a couple things happened. That feeling of wanting to be a leader, of understanding some of the characteristics it takes to be a leader, really, I think, started to cement during this MBA period. Partly because I was also seeing all these incredible people around me. My colleague, my classmates were just incredible. The things they had done, the things they want to do. And then I was at Wharton, at a place where they tell you, like, once you leave, you're going to be a leader. So it was kind of this like reinforcement from two angles. But most importantly, I think that's when the itch started. And I did a couple of years at McKinsey, but then after that, in the kind of corporate environment, I would say it really came together. I was This was going back now 20 plus years, and if there was a division of Abbott that was focused on hospital products, and that division was being spun out to create a separate company called Hospira. That company Hospira later on was acquired by Pfizer. But because of my engineering skills, my MBA, my time at McKinsey, and kind of my reputation for being um, a problem solver and getting stuff done, I was chosen to be part of this global transition team, reporting directly to the CEO to spin the company out and set it up. Now, this was pretty significant because I was still very early in my career, and everyone else on that team was the head of some large function. I was like this young strategy guy. So, sitting in that room and looking around was when the penny dropped, saying, wow, this is pretty awesome. Like, this is the room where things are getting decided. This is the room where decisions are being made. And this is the room where the influence is happening. And and I was watching, how did people lead? How did people use facts and data? How did people use storytelling? How did people use, like, what were all the different tools and characteristics that people were using in order to um, yeah, decide the direction of travel for this company? And I think that really energized me. And then consequently, like, I had to actually lead a very large organization of people much younger than me in order to execute on a big part of this project. And that's where a lot of these pieces came together. And ultimately, it was very, very successful. Um, and I have a lot of people to thank for that, in terms of the coaching and the teaching. But I was watching, I was learning, I was seeing, how did these people who had been doing this for 20, 30 years, how do they make an impact, and what are the bits and pieces I can choose that will fit with me, with my DNA, with my personality, with my characteristics, in a way to drive influence. And I'm I'm still so proud of this whole experience. I mean, I was in Athens a couple of weeks ago for this Medicines for Europe, and I ran into a guy that was actually a part of my team on that project 20 years ago. He came right up to me, gave me a hug. I mean, it was amazing. I hadn't seen the guy in decades. And
Yeah.
it was just, I think that's also where that you are having an impact, again, on people and colleagues, when you maintain these relationships, and when people want to come and talk to you about, hey, you remember that thing we did together, or this or that. And I really get a lot of energy out of that too.
Yeah. Because you and I have spoken about this before, where it's almost like you've got these really strong foundations that then set you up to be a CEO. So, you talk about this Hospira spin out, the engineering, the working on site, the being, the learning, the strategy, then the commercial leadership. So, you know, was it deliberate, or were you finding at first you were just making these steps and then you made it more deliberate?
Yeah, more of the latter. I think in the early days, I was taking steps. I was I had a rough roadmap of the things that I wanted to learn, the things I wanted to see, I wanted to do. Um, but I think as pieces started to fall into place is when I realized that, wait a minute, if I'm a bit more deliberate about this, I can move myself in a direction where I can, have a larger leadership role. I can have more, more impact. And that purpose thing, I come back to that purpose a lot because yeah, I think we're all very fortunate. We can work in lots of different industries. Like there's lots of great industries out there, tech, financial services, food, whatever it may be. I never strayed from this because of what we do. Like every day you can see the impact we're having. Like everyone unfortunately has a sick father or a mother or a brother or a spouse or whatever. And every day you see it. You see the difference that we make. And that kept me really on this path. And that was the foundation to say, as I started to realize that I liked this leadership thing, I liked the combination of the strategy, how to work with people, how to define short and long term goals. I said, this is what I want to lean into. And I would say that's when it started becoming a little bit more purposeful, to say, how do I now, design my career so that I am getting these opportunities to make a bigger impact. But I think you have to have these different pieces. From in my case, it was the engineering background. It was like skills and experiences. You mentioned a couple of those. Um, and then as I got a little bit older slash mature, and I started understanding what I wanted and how I could make more of a difference, um, I think then it was a couple of things. It was drive and ambition. Again, having that clarity of what it is I wanted to do. I think it was understanding how to connect the dots in a more material way that impacts the organization, not just to get a project done, but to actually get something bigger, more meaningful done. I had a couple of bumps in the road where I didn't take feedback well, and I learned that constant coaching, constant feedback, asking for it, taking it on board was absolutely critical. Um, yeah, and then just taking the opportunities when they come, like being not overthinking it. Like when something that looks interesting comes up, grab it. You don't, I spent a lot of time in my early career overthinking these things. And I do a lot of these kind of career talks at the universities I went to. And I almost always start with, um, when I'm talking to seniors, I almost start with, guys, the first job you take, I can tell you with 1000% certainty will not be the last. Don't overthink it. It's just the first job. If you're choosing between 5 amazing companies, they're all amazing. Don't worry about it. Just go, just go and learn, uh, contribute, make a difference, and see where it goes.
Was
And
was there I was going to say, was there a moment when maybe from a kind of C-suite level, was there a moment when you first realized that you wanted to lead at the higher level and thought, you know what, I'm going to put my skills, experiences, drive, ambition, coaching, feedback, I'm going to put this all together. Actually, I now believe in myself that I can do this.
yeah, yeah, I can tell you exactly when that was. It was in 2007. I was working at Baxter, and I was running a strategy team for what was then called medication delivery. And medication delivery was a huge global business unit, 4+ billion of sales. It was injectables, a lot of hospital products, nutrition, and medical devices. So where I'd kind of been building some experience with, retail, hospital, med tech, et cetera, et cetera. And I was brought on board by this incredible leader who was trying to get more leverage out of the different businesses. So it was a strategy team to lead a strategy team to get more value out of having these individual businesses, right? So pretty standard stuff. After a year, I had been working with the various GMs of these businesses. We'd made a bunch of great progress, et cetera, et cetera. And I was getting more and more kind of anxious isn't the right word, but ambitious to say, man, I don't want to just be on the side. I want to now be leading one of these things. And I'm having a kind of a career talk with the guy running the division, and he says to me, I know what you want to do. You're a smart guy, but I want to see if you can make money. So he gives me an opportunity to be one of these GMs. And it's kind of funny because it was one of those pivotal moments where, I mean, he was tongue in cheek. I want to see if you can make money, but it's really about, I want to see, can you lead a large organization? Can you, can you, communicate the strategy, the ambition? Can you solve complex problems? Can you motivate people and be responsible for it, not just be an advisor? And I'm like, I jumped at it. And that was really, I would say, the second kind of pivotal change after that Hospira experience, where it put me in the hot seat and it made me realize, wow, leadership of an organization where you're dealing with manufacturing, R&D, the sales, the EBITDA, people, et cetera, man, this is complicated. Like
Yeah.
there are a lot of moving parts, and it really does take all of those skills and experiences. It really does take the coaching, the feedback, the stamina, the things I mentioned before. It takes all of those coming together in a way that you can distill down to simple things that make people want to do it, right? They want to follow the lead because they believe in the purpose, they believe it's achievable, all of those kinds of things. And that to me was that second really incredible one. And from there, I think it was it was sort of open road. I said, this is what I love doing. I want to do more of this. I want to do more global roles. I want more product complexity. I want to combine the R&D, the manufacturing, the sales, the marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And so I still, when I talk to him, I credit him. I say, you kind of lit the fuse, and I'm really glad you did, because that's what helped me figure out what I really want to do.
Yeah. And I think, the one of the major catalysts that we haven't spoken about yet, for some of the listeners, obviously they know that you've grew up in Chicago, but we're recording this, you're at your place in London. So, how important has being a global citizen been for you, and actually what was international experience as an accelerator? How did that work for you?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying you don't have to have an international experience to become a global life sciences CEO or leader. Right? You don't have to. It certainly helps. And I think I always encourage people to do what makes sense for them, what they want to do, what they enjoy doing, et cetera, et cetera. But let's put that to the side now, that disclaimer to the side. It's pivotal. It was pivotal for me. I think it changes your whole mindset. I think it opens up a whole new way of thinking. You've got to learn how to communicate, styles, cultures, markets, market structure. I mean, I think it's just so amazing from a professional point of view, and from a personal point of view, the same. You now in my situation, I was really lucky. I did it twice. So the first time was when I was an engineer. I actually moved to Abingdon, and I worked in a medical device factory, and I lived in Oxford, and I came over
Nice.
and I came over with five other young engineers. So we did this for a year. It was like the most incredible experience one could have. I'm working in this factory. We're living in Oxford. We're having the time of our life, and we're just absorbing all of it. And look, how a factory runs here was very different than how the one ran in Boston and the one in Chicago, and the sorts of things, not the quality systems and so forth, but just the whole dynamic, the whole culture. So that was like my first experience where I said, wow, this was like too good to be true almost. Um, and then later on in my career, when I had the opportunity again, back in 2010, I jumped on it immediately. Now, the opportunity in 2010 was at a much more senior level. It was to come and run a European business. Now, I had been traveling back and forth with my various experiences, so I had obviously an idea of how it worked. But when you're on the ground, when you're you physically relocate, you bring your family over, you've got to figure out all the personal stuff, and you've got to figure out all the professional stuff. It's not easy, but I think it is one of those like unlocking moments in someone's career. Um, I'll give you an example. Like I always use this expression, like you've got to go to someone else's house. Like like I have to go to your house to understand what's it like for you. What problems are you solving? What's your perspective on this? And I think you've got to do that to get this deep understanding of the markets, the culture, um, not just the technical things like how tender processes work, but it's the motivation of people, right? Again, connected to leadership, how do you motivate people to go the extra mile? Is it compensation? Is it extra time off? Is it an attaboy? Is it a party in the office? Like, I think all of that links back to culture and the norms, the taboos, things that work in the US or the UK, they're not going to work in Sweden or the Netherlands or in Japan. So so all of those things are just amazing learning experiences. Um, and it's funny, I tend to talk a little bit fast, or I used to talk fast. I don't talk that fast anymore because this is part of the learning and coaching where someone reminded me everything you do is in English. English is a second language for everyone else. So speak slower. You need to communicate more deliberately because you're not doing it in their language, you're doing it in yours. And it's these simple things like that that I think are so important because it shows that you care. And I really do care. um, I'll tell you another funny small example. Like you've probably been to Iceland. If you've ever, you fly on Icelandic air. This is a mindset topic. So you go to Iceland, and every map in Iceland has Iceland in the middle of the world. No one else in the world has Iceland in the middle of a global map, but they do. And it's just one of those small reminders that anywhere you go, that is the center of the world for that culture. So you've got to give it your time, your attention, your full focus to how you make that market successful, how you understand how that culture works, what motivates those people. And I always remember that as I move, that becomes the center of the universe. And I think that's a great way to engage. And again, connected back to leadership, it's a great way to show that you're an empathetic leader. Like you care about what's happening in that market for that team, for those people. And that helps. Yeah, that
Yeah,
helps create yeah, that commitment.
it's very interesting because, you know, you, like many others, have probably traveled exponentially throughout your time, and you end up flying, you end up going to very similar airports, very similar hotels. It's kind of like you're frazzled. Where am I? What am I doing here? But it seems as though you always take that moment to, pause, engage, think, right, where am I? What am I doing here? Rather than, rolling from one location to the next. So is that important for you to just kind of centralize your thoughts before moving on?
Super important. I think I do a couple of small things. Like if I go to a new location, I ensure that I'm not doing calls for somewhere else. So I want to give my full time and attention to the destination I'm at, the team I'm with, and whatever the agenda topics are. Because I think it's just for me, I don't know, I feel like I learned a long time ago that you spend all this time going somewhere to go do something else. Now, okay, sometimes it's unavoidable, but so, having individual meetings, having town halls, doing things that are considered to be norms for the culture are the kinds of things I love to do. I'll give you another small example. So I like most people in the UK now, I've gotten into paddle tennis. Right, it's become a everyone plays paddle tennis. So one of the things I do, we've got a factory in Barcelona, and Spanish love paddle, and they're amazing at it. So one of the things I started doing a couple of years ago is every time I would go, I'd host a paddle tournament, and we would have it open for everyone in the factory. Now, two things happened. Number one, I got to improve my game because I'm playing with people who are way better than me, which is important. But maybe the more important one is it changed my whole engagement model with our team. because now all of a sudden we're getting people from all across the organization, all levels, who are signing up to play paddle and come and spend some time with me. So it gives me the opportunity to talk, engage, ask questions, work, personal, whatever it may be. And it's just been another one of these like examples where I really always focus on how can I keep pushing myself to be a better leader. And I think to be a better leader, you've got to engage with the colleagues in a more than superficial way. So I try and find these kinds of activities when I go somewhere. It could be a walking tour of a city. It might be a town hall. It might just be a coffee with Anish. It could be anything. But in order to engage and connect, and yeah, the other benefit is you learn so much. You learn about what's going on the ground when you break down these barriers, and they see I'm an approachable guy. Like it's not a persona that I create. I'm just a guy from Chicago who's very approachable and very down to earth. And I want all of my colleagues, partners, customers, to see that. And I think that is a core principle of my leadership style as well. We talked about that authenticity. Authenticity means a lot of things to a lot of people, but for me, I sum it up with that expression. I take my work seriously, but not myself. And
Yeah.
when I live that, people see it, they talk about it, and yeah, and it makes me proud that I come across as I am.
Yeah, and it's purposeful and it's deliberate, but it's also, human and with a real desire to engage. That's basically what I'm hearing. So, having moved to the UK, has there been sort of lots of Friday afternoons in the pub? That's what people in the UK are very good at.
Yeah, some of that, and you got to find what works. And yeah, I've worked in a bunch of different companies here now and a bunch of different people, but that definitely is a part of it. I mean, that social interaction is super critical. So yeah, there's been a few of those.
So let's talk about, like, let's kind of get into the nitty-gritty of a really important topic. Um, because throughout your career, you spoke about growth mindset, but let's talk about the deal makers mindset, because you've been able to work within organizations, but also lead organizations through partnerships, through M&A, especially within this kind of generics world. What's your philosophy on creating those win-win partnerships when it comes to the deal maker mindset?
Yeah. So I heard a quote from someone I used to work with a long time ago where he said, "When I win and they lose, that's success." So I anchored that in to say I'm going to do the opposite for all of the deal making I engage in, because when I win and they lose, that is not success. I really fundamentally believe that it's got to be a win-win situation, and especially in our little part of the industry. So when I talk about little part, generics, specialty generics, et cetera, um, it's a small industry. So I go into it always assuming that this will be one of many deals. This will be a long-term relationship, a partnership. So it is absolutely critical to ensure that both parties feel like they're getting something out of this. So I focus on how we increase the size of the pie, not how we split the pie. And that could come through price, volume, geographies, life cycle management. There's a lot of different levers you can pull in order to expand the size of the pie. Um, so that's a very important principle for me. I think deal deals get killed due to, yeah, speed. Speed kills deals. Let's say, lack of speed, meaning. So when things get delayed, they get slowed down. You get bogged down in small details. You know, it's that time that's lost that kills most deals. So I focus on, again, speed, agility. Um, you know, Back to the relationship thing, building trust, transparency. I think those are all super important. I mean, another thing that we do is we always model what does the deal look like from the counterparty side? Because again, back to this isn't lip service to a win-win. I want to know, is this going to be interesting for them as well? So we will always have two perspectives on it. And I think that's a very important way to inform whether this win-win mindset is just talk or whether it's real.
Yeah, it's interesting as well when you mentioned your first active ingredient being strategic conviction. Do you feel that it's the same in deal making?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I think that underpins deal making. So there's always a financial component, but I think the real part is that strategic conviction. And again, it's easy to do a deal into a space that everyone's going into, but it's much harder to do a deal if you want to be a first mover, if you want to take a calculated risk, if you want to push the organization into a slightly different direction. I mean, that's where that, again, driven by facts and data, a linked to the purpose and the vision and the mission of the company. But that's where outsized returns can be gained. Is that when you do something slightly different from everyone else, that creates the opportunity to create more value.
Yeah, love it. So, other than the win-win and the kind of longer term partnership, they're things that I think are the signs of a good deal maker. What separates a good deal maker from a great one?
Yeah, good question. Um, I think the simplest one is knowing when to walk away.
Interesting.
Yeah, too many times, too many people get deal fever, and there's all this pressure to get the deal done from the board, from shareholders, from colleagues who have worked on it for a long time. And deal fever is a real thing. I've been in the room, I've seen it. And I think that really is the difference, because all the other stuff we talked about, agree. You've got to find ways to create more value. Again, focus on the long term partnership. These are not one-time transactions, but yeah, it's that knowing when to walk away, and also knowing where to go hunting. We spend a lot of time thinking and acting on new areas that could make the company more interesting. And over the course of my career, I've been fortunate to have been a part of a lot of those. Um, you don't just want to analyze what comes your way. You want to go out and purposely find things that fit into the strategy, the vision, the impact you're trying to have. And I think when you can do that and you find something, a couple of benefits. You're not in a process, so you do have the ability to maybe evaluate it in a different way. But also I think you're showing the organization that you're taking these courageous steps to expand the company, grow the company, to deliver on the purpose, the vision, to have more patient impact. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, love it. Um, so one thing that I think is going to be interesting, especially in the current landscape that we are finding ourselves in, is the ability to build, scale, and exit. Okay, so that's quite an interesting. There's more private equity money now in some aspects of the industry, CDMO, generics, etc. What's it like going from being a like corporate leader to then a PE-backed CEO?
It's very, very different.
And how
It's
did you
it.
manage that?
Well, I made two major changes at once. I went from being kind of a divisional or regional leader to a CEO. So that job is extremely different. And I went from a public organization to a private equity backed one. So I made two pretty big changes at one time, which was not easy in the beginning, to be very honest. I think great large companies are amazing places. I mean, you could sense the way I talked about my early days at Abbott, right? I have such an affinity and such an admiration for those kinds of companies. They're great to learn. You engage with amazing people. they're talented, their conviction level is high. Um, they're great enablers. But as they get bigger, they become bureaucratic. They become less agile. They lack the speed. So, so for me, I always what I was fortunate to have done was spent many years at these larger organizations where I felt like that foundational learning um, was really imperative for my career. And then I kind of went to a smaller organization, and then I ended up in private equity. And that was in hindsight, that was a very, very logical career path. It just sort of happened a little bit, but I'm really glad it did, because each time I went to a slightly smaller organization, there's more accountability, there's more transparency, there's more agility required. And then private equity is kind of the ultimate sort of that ultimate environment for where those things are required. So so it was really a focus on speed, decision making. The accountability is, well, just there is no more accountability one can get than in that situation where you are the CEO of a portfolio company. So all the decisions aren't made by me, but they are backed by me. And ultimately, I am the accountable individual. Now, the environment, I have to say, once you figure out how they think and how this works, the environment's actually awesome. It's it really is an environment where the parties are aligned. There is a huge amount of synergy, and there is a very, very clear, I won't say singular, but there's a very clear focus on value creation. And that value creation, then, it's the CEO and the management team's job to figure out, how do you articulate what value creation means? There's a short term, there's a medium term, there's a long term. There's investments in CapEx, there's investments in new markets, there's all kinds of different levers you can pull. And what I've learned in the sort of 10 plus years of working in private equity owned companies is figure that out fast, align with the board, um, then get the team to fully support it in an achievable, a believable, a credible plan, and then run. And when you do that, I think more often than not, it does lead to success. There will be bumps in the road, of course. I mean, our plan when we started this didn't account for the geopolitical turmoil. It didn't account for the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. It didn't, like, all these things that have happened that have in a way become the new norm. It didn't account for those things, and it can't. I mean, you can never know the unknowable unknowables, but what we had was a very, very clear plan that we aligned on to focus on those various time points. And I think the best private equity firms and management teams work together to say, this is not about cost cutting. This is not about how do I maximize EBITDA in 2 or 3 years. That's not the job. The job is, how do we make good companies better sustainably? And I've been really lucky that the various shareholders I've worked with have really shared in that feeling to say, Synthon this year will celebrate 35 years. And we always talk about, what's the 70th year going to look like? Not 5 years from now or 7 years from now, it's the 70th. We're very proud of what's been built. And we want to maintain that. And that comes with making continued sustainable investments. So, so I think that's the foundation. And I've had great teams work with me so that we can actually get alignment on it. Again, both financially, strategically, and then it's about execution. And then the other couple of things that I think some of your other guests have mentioned: total transparency. My philosophy with them is, we share everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, the bad and the ugly, we always have a plan. It's not just, hey, here's the bad and the ugly, but
Yeah.
here's what we're going to do about it. And our language of communicating is facts and data. So I would say this is another big difference where there's maybe a little bit more strategic storytelling for the very long term in a public corporate environment. I think in our environment, we do a little bit of that, but our language of communication is facts and data. And that works well. And again, it links back to the transparency. We are extremely transparent. We show them all the data. We position trade-offs for what they are. If we make this investment, this is what it gets. If we don't, like, and then we make the recommendations. And I think the this really works when you have that trust, that transparency, and um, everyone realizes what their role is. I love that expression. You stay in your lane. They're investors. We're operators. We're I always tell them I could never do your job, and I don't think you could do my job. And when we all nod heads, we say, great, then we're aligned. But together, we can actually do this job a little bit better because we bring different perspectives to the table, and we're all looking at the same situation, the market, the competition, the pipeline, the geopolitics, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really where I think these healthy discussions happen, and good alignment.
And gets you out of the short term. The constant hammering of the short term is where a lot of the issues we see
Yeah,
happening.
yeah. And look, that's going to happen, right? There's no doubt. If the short term performance isn't great, naturally that's where the conversation gravitates to. But but again, having that alignment that I think all investors would agree, like they want to sell a better company than they bought. And better is not just more EBITDA. Better really is a better pipeline, a a a wider geographical footprint, a more effective, cost of goods footprint, whatever it may be. I don't think you'll find a single investor that would disagree with that, because I think that also makes them proud that they're working with management teams to make better companies. And that's where that, yeah, better sometimes, if the short term isn't going great, maybe there's a bit more focus there. But that's what we keep as kind of our North Star is, hey, we're making these investments, we're doing these things because we know we're going to make a better company, and we know we're going to have more patient impact. And that's where I would say my job is hardest in this, in the sense of leadership, is that I'm managing or I'm leading different stakeholder groups. And this is where all these things we've talked about, the experiences, that strategic conviction, the authenticity, the stamina, the problem solving frameworks I have, all of that really comes together because the leader is the pivot point between all the different stakeholders, and being able to communicate what's important when to which group, is probably the most fun part of my job, but also a bit of the hardest one too.
And also staying true to your values throughout all of that. As the stressometer, starts to go to level 10, it's about, coming back to what you believe in, as you say. Also, it's that patient centricity that you need, um, even when you're talking EBIT, or you're talking to people about value creation. It's still, it seems as though that North Star really is that patient impact for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And now also more than ever, you know, security of supply, having an onshore manufacturing footprint in Europe, being close to the markets, engaging with regulators, like that's very important for us. I mean, I think the European generics industry is absolutely critical. And of course, you can always get lower cost product from different places, but to ensure that we have stockpiling, we have security supply, the Critical Medicines Act, all these different things that are happening now in Brussels, are important. And I and our company, we're very firm believers in that. So you combine that with the patient, the European element, the high quality, all of those things really, for me, is that motivator. And when things do get tough, because they do, of course, I think back to those as to why I do it,
Yeah,
and the
love it.
team, why we do it.
Fantastic. So let me let me switch lanes. I always like to end the podcast with a optimistic lens on the future of the industry, the future of leadership. So let's kick off with the future of life sciences. What excites you most about the travel of direction?
Yeah, I think that the innovation technology is awesome. Whether it's what's happening in peptides, it's antibody drug conjugates, you know, biologics, oligonucleotides, antibody, all the combinations of things that are happening, I think is just amazing. And the integration of AI into these new modalities that will decrease the time to market, and have better outcomes for patients is fantastic. So I always think about where we are. We're at the end of the funnel. We need more amazing therapeutics coming into the beginning of the funnel so that we can create generics and we can drive more access and more affordable medicines. And I love having the conversation with innovators who understand how synergistic and symbiotic our two industries are, because they really are. So they do that, and that gives us more targets. So at Synthon, we're going after a lot of these. We're starting to invest in some of these new technologies because, yeah, they're not here today, but we know in 5 or 10 years, if you have a therapeutic that's a million quid a year, nobody's getting access to it. So it's not actually having the intended benefit that it should. If we can bring that to market, safe, effective, and you know more reasonably priced, we're doing our thing. So that's probably the most that's the thing I get most excited about. And I talked a little bit about AI, but just the integration of AI and machine learning and technology just to accelerate this path to market. Um, and then that would allow us as well to accelerate our generic development. And the more we can do cost effectively, the more products we can bring.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'm super optimistic about it.
yeah, same. And as you say, I think that you're part of the funnel is a really pivotal and interesting part that over the past 10 years especially has become more and more under the microscope. And even from a career standpoint, we're now seeing that a career in generics biosimilars is actually now going to be super rewarding for the next 5, 10, 15. So yeah, it's a really interesting shift. What about the future of leadership? uh, what qualities do you think are going to define the future leaders or the future CEOs of the life sciences?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. So here's what's changed. I think I think that you have a lot of different generations in the workforce, and it's a little bit like our discussion on countries and cultures. Each generation is very different. How they engage, what they expect out of an employer, how much they want to be in the office versus not. Oh, right. There are so many variables that are all different. So I think leadership of the future, um, has to be even more agile and more versatile than it's ever been. Um, and and understanding that at the core, it's still about how do you motivate and excite people to follow you, right? To follow the purpose and the vision of the company. And so that's not going to change. And all the different characteristics of strategy, empathy, financial literacy, et cetera, all of those things are going to be the same. But for me, it comes down to people. I mean, the way we think about AI is an enabler, not to take headcount out, but it's an enabler for our growth. So if we can grow more without adding more people, that's a real win. So that's how we think about it. There's other companies that think about AI to take people out. Like,
Yeah.
that's not our philosophy. So I think that leaders have to be completely AI and technology literate. I think there is no room to hide anymore, and that connection with people. So AI will not get rid of people. It shouldn't. right? People is what makes companies run and makes companies great and builds culture and so forth. So it's understanding those different um, segments of the colleagues and how you engage with them in order to then bring people together to follow that that clear purpose and vision.
Yeah, it's interesting. AI readiness in leadership is now starting to either entice talent to certain businesses or maybe even say, if you're a leader in an organization that isn't investing, then they're going, well, I'm not going to be ready for what comes next if the investment isn't there in AI in the company that I'm currently working for. So I might go somewhere else because otherwise I'll miss the boat.
That
So it's quite
that's
an
it.
interesting dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So
it's and I'm sure in the last like sort of 18 months, right? Because probably 18 months earlier, people weren't thinking about it because it was all so new. It wasn't becoming pervasive in everything we do. But now, yeah, if it's not a part of if it's not a part of how the fabric of how a company operates, and leaders aren't learning, they're not developing, they're not using it to re-engineer processes, they're going to be left behind.
yeah. So my final question, what advice would you give to the next generation of leaders looking to build a career in life sciences?
First of all, ensure that the purpose of what we do connects with your own values, because work is hard. Um, Work can be exhausting, but at the same time, work is rewarding if you feel that what you're doing aligns with your values and you're making an impact. So I think that's number one. So that's about it, choosing industries. Um, I think number two is be ambitious. I think push yourself outside of the comfort zone. Take the roles that the little voice inside you says, "Are you sure? Should you do it? Is it risky?" Don't listen to that voice. Take the roles and the opportunities that come up that give you a chance to shine and also learn about yourself. Number three, learning comes from everywhere. It comes from all situations. It comes from seniors. It comes from people who work from you. It comes from competitors. It comes from partners, colleagues. Never miss a moment. Um, never miss the learning moment, because I think it can happen everywhere, and you really need to internalize those things um, to help build your own leadership capabilities. And I think the fourth one is probably just be as AI literate as possible, because that is a fundamental requirement now, and it will not change. So I'll leave it with those four things.
Anish, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed this from that moment in Chicago, thinking, right, I'm going Abbott. That's where I'm going to now in the UK, working for Synthon, and everything in between. Has been an absolute pleasure to hear your story, and thank you very much for sharing all your frameworks and experiences. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah, really enjoyed talking about it, and thank you. Thanks for the time.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, all the best.